Okay, hello, Brian Hickman here. I want to show you this user experience prototype app that I've created using Cursor and several different AI models using vibe coding. But what is this app? Why the heck am I making it? What am I playing with? Why do you care? Let me show you. So real quick, a little bit about myself. I've been a technical program manager and product manager for a long time at a bunch of fun places, but I don't write code, or at least I haven't in at least 15 years. So the only way I can contribute to apps is working with other fantastic engineers. But now with this vibe coding movement, I can hop into apps like Cursor, pick one of these models, and I can actually at least make some prototypes. The code might be sloppy or messy, but these things keep getting better and better, and I can at least experiment. So what am I trying to accomplish? Well, first, you want to see more about this app called Brush. Jonathan Stevens runs this great channel where he will show you more about how to use this app and how it works. It's all about 3D Gaussian splatting, and it can run right on your MacBook. I happen to have it open right here. And what blows me away by it is the fact that I don't need a giant NVIDIA GPU under my desk to work on this, or I'm not using expensive NVIDIA GPUs in the server to do this. I just dragged in some 2D image files, and we can see this 3D scene is being reconstructed right here on my MacBook Pro, which has an M2 chip in it. So it's not even the latest of them. I absolutely love that this also works in a web browser, and that's because this application Brush was written in Rust and uses a UI framework called eGUI, and it can be compiled for desktop or web. In this demo here, we actually can see it running in a browser, both showing a nice 3D Gaussian splat asset being rendered, and we can also see the training run right over here. So more about the Brush app here in the GitHub repo, here in this great video by Jonathan Stevens. What I'm looking at is how can we improve the user experience of this app, because it was really designed for researchers. It has a bunch of technical information on the screen, very blocky layout. And when you look at the Discord, everybody's excited and talking about the algorithms inside, how to make them faster, more memory efficient, more capable, and not really a lot of focus on how to make this a platform that other people can build products on. It came out of Google Research and has that very research mindset. But I think there's something here for other people to put brush technology into their own applications, whether they're web-based or desktop-based. But we would need to do some things to improve the user experience and sort of refactor the difference between background processes and what we see here in the UI. So Brush uses this extension to eGUI called eGUI tiles to get these tabs. And that's how the application can drag these squares around, and you can sort of rearrange the layout. But I really like how eGUI itself, which again is this UI framework written in Rust, has these nice floating windows. And so this sort of reminds me of a lot of IMGUI demos like NVIDIA's famous Instant NGP, where there's a background and then your widgets are just sort of layered on top. But Brush is using eGUI, but not using this windowing mode. And the team happens to like the docking. So I did a little experiment and I said, what if we could do that where the background is the 3D content? That's the main thing about Brush is the 3D. So let's make the main thing and then have windows just layered on top. This was a quick prototype that I made. This was done with Claude 3.7 Sonnet as the agent. And I shared the results here on the Brush Discord. I got some good feedback that the UI was very interesting. Some people said, we should maybe make it the default UI. But when people went and looked at the code, it was a mess. It was terrible. What happens with Claude, in my opinion, is it is so eager to please that if it goes to try to do something and it doesn't work on the first shot, it will get incredibly crazy creative by doing workarounds and hacks that are often unnecessary. And it sometimes will make changes very myopically, looking at one small portion of the code and not thinking how that might impact other parts of the code. But then when you go to compile your Rust application, you get these compilation errors, and then it just goes swatting at fixing all of these without really thinking through why it's happening. So I really enjoyed working with Cursor and Claude and getting this built, but it left a mess and it became rather unmanageable. So one thing I learned with these AI tools is they work well if you can feed them good documentation. And the reason is analyzing all the code every time on every call is a lot to ask. And code itself doesn't always capture what the user intent is or what the functional workflow or user journey is for the app. What step are you trying to guide the user towards? What is the goal of the application? It just has sort of how it works. So I created all of this documentation using AI tools, and I was quite pleased with these. I thought this was a really impressive set of docs. It was thousands of words. We had a lot of screenshots. It walked through how to use the app. And the idea was I could feed an AI agent something like an architecture doc, and it could just quickly skim a markdown file to get an understanding of how its change might affect the architecture without having on every prompt having to go think through the entire code tree and plan for every code change. It could take these documents as sort of like a post-training step where it's already analyzed everything and summarized it. So I thought these docs would be incredibly helpful there, and I thought I might contribute them back to the project too. But I shared them here with glee in the Discord channel. I said, 2,000 lines of code, there's 12,000 words of docs here. Thought this was pretty impressive. Turns out they were nonsense. So Arthur, the uh, the main maintainer of Brush now, who also works at Google DeepMind, kindly took a look at the docs, but said, these are really bad. There's hallucinated information. The technology's not correct. And it was like, even if I go fix the technical bits, it's also just not arranged in a way that would be really useful to a developer. So I took that to heart and I said, okay, how am I going to keep extending this app? Vibe coding, not an engineer myself. I can't write the code myself. I've not been a technical writer either. So I went to Gemini and I said, I need you to come up with a strategy and audit these docs and figure out where we messed up. And so I think this portion of information is up on GitHub if anyone wants to see it. I think it's good learnings for anyone who's working on Claude or Gemini on post training and wants to think, how can we make these things create better documentation? We found some interesting things. So all these quotes came from Arthur critiquing the documentation. And I said, what's the plan? I said, well, let's go over our inventory. Let's go and look at each part of the code, and we're going to compare the code to the claims in the docs and go through it one by one. And it did that. It went and basically, in its audit summary, um, found that Arthur was right. The documentation that we had created was really, really bad. And as I worked on this, I would sometimes bring in Claude to second guess Gemini and add a little bit of extra digging, but most of this was done with Gemini Max. So it completed this audit, and then page by page, you can see the green check marks when it thought the content was okay, but these yellow exclamations was when it found some serious problems. And it ended up finding like quite a few serious problems in important areas. And that kind of makes your docs unusable if you can't trust them. But we wanted to understand why and not repeat this problem. So Gemini and I worked together. I say we there, because there was a bit of back and forth about doing a postmortem and saying like, why did this happen? Um, you can read more about it here, but it's a mix of these LLMs aren't perfect. I have some user error. There's better ways I could use them. And then as they're integrated in Cursor, one of the things you can't control is what Cursor decides to send to the language model. So sometimes it only sends a portion of your code or your docs, unless you explicitly tell it otherwise. And the LLM is sometimes acting on impartial context. And the conclusion was, we can't fix these docs. They're so bad. Let's just start over. So I did. We've got a new set of docs here that I think are fantastic. I'm not going to go into them here in this video, but you can see the URL here. I have them up on GitHub as well. And I think these are much, much cleaner. I trust that these actually work. And I'm now using them to make the prototypes that I want. So first thing I did, let's get into the prototypes, is I actually tried using a extension called eGUI doc. I wanted to see how useful it would be because it has this ability to dock and undock different panels. So let's actually take a look at eGUI doc I made real quick. All right, so we can drag windows around, we can minimize and expand them, and then we can dock them, and they end up here in tabs. But we can take these out, and we can use the splitting capability here to split different panels, which is kind of neat. You can resize them. So we can get the nice panel look that Brush was built with, or you can drag a tab and just kind of drag it out into the open and it becomes a little floating panel. So, I mean, visually, not super attractive. I don't know if rounded corners are still hot these days, but this sort of square look has I don't know, a distinct feel to it. But at least we've got a proven ability to have floating panels and the ability to have them dock. And you can even make panels next to other panels, tabs next to other tabs in the floating windows. This was really nice, and I thought this had promise, but doing anything more than this, it really starts having kernel panics and crashes, which I don't want to do right now. So what I'll just tell you is, we looked into the issues list on GitHub, and we're finding really bad kernel panics, so much so that this guy who is Adam is the maintainer of eGUI doc, kind of says it, to be fair, it needs a rewrite. It's becoming harder and harder to maintain as it grows. This was posted last September, so it was over 6 months ago, but it still seems to be true that eGUI doc might actually be something that sort of reached its limits and what it's capable of. And we should really focus on using eGUI tiles anytime we want to make things like this. eGUI tiles is maintained by the great folks at Rerun.io, and I believe is more likely to have long-going support behind it. And ideally, we would see some of the eGUI doc capabilities just come into eGUI tiles so that we don't have to have these different trade-offs. In fact, Adam says that he kind of wants to replace a lot of the drag and drop stuff from eGUI doc back with mainline eGUI. So I think that's kind of end of life there, in my opinion. So let's take a look at the prototype I made that is using eGUI tiles. And so it starts out looking like the main brush app. This is the same layout. But you'll note there's fake content here. The reason there's fake content here is because I wanted to quickly iterate with the UI. And the main brush app, unfortunately, has a lot of execution logic embedded in the visual windows. And so making them come and go and disappear would just completely crash the app. So that's a future to do, is to really separate background processes from the UI elements so that other people can build their own UIs and reuse those same fundamental background processes. So with this, we can get the same tab dragging around that you can with the current brush app, but we've added this new little button here with a little eject icon, and it can eject these embedded tabs, docked tabs, into floating windows. So they can float around. So we can make this look like the concept. You could say, okay, I'm done setting my settings. Let me put that over there. I might even say I don't even need my presets. I might say I want to watch my stats. And so you can very comfortably rearrange things where the 3D would be the main content in the background, and we can have these floating windows on top. And then there is this little anchor as a dock icon. If you want to redock the floating window, you can go ahead and do that. You can redock them back here. You can rearrange things to your heart's content using standard eGUI tools. So that's where the prototype is right now. There's a few things we still want to work on. I've got the code up here if anyone wants to check this out. I'm not certain that this code is not a mess either, but it was meant to be a prototype quickly built to try doing different experiments. You can see the screenshot of the tabbed layout and then the windowed layout right here. And then if we look at the to-dos, some of the things are we want to make sure that once you close docked panels, like I did with the presets, that there's somewhere to go fetch them from and bring them back out. And a few other experiments that I want to do as well. And then when I feel like this UX is really working, I want to get some feedback from folks on Discord, then I'll go take the main brush app and very, very carefully ask Gemini to come up with a plan and implement the plan very carefully. There is a plan here for the prototype, and I've found that anytime you're working with these LLMs, if you have them write a plan, then have a different AI agent critique the plan, it really helps. It then breaks problems down into smaller steps that the LLMs can actually go do one by one. And then as you learn things as you're going, I always ask my agent to update the plan, update where we were wrong, update our new findings. And so this plan file right here captures a lot of what's been learned so far as I've been testing. And I think it will help a lot when I go to implement this docking and undocking into the mainline app, or at least I hope so. All right, that's it for now. That's an overview of my vibe coding hacking on Brush and eGUI, and I'll hopefully have more later.